John, it is Fat Elvis Friday. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, I love that thumbnail. I don't know where you found this Elvis character, but that takes the cake. I love it.
Thank you. Well, actually, Alvin
Phenomenal.
Bragg takes the cake, but this Elvis probably has taken a few cakes as well. I got a funny story about this thumbnail, John, because, it was your idea. We were talking about conspiracy theories and how the lab leak, it's sort of getting into the mainstream here. We've got the Wuhan lab. There's a leak, apparently. We're going to have to look into that. I don't know if that's the leak that they were talking about, but, when this idea began, I wanted to use AI to create the image, John. And, when I think of conspiracy theories, one of the first things that comes to mind is the flat Earth. And I was asking two different AI generative art applications to give me an image of a flat Earth under like a cake, like a glass, like a pheasant under glass with the Earth in there. It would not give me an image of a flat Earth. It was always a globe. And so flat Earth aficionados will say, oh, you see, that's proof that you can drive off the edge of the Earth. I don't agree with that. But it's interesting that AI was not cooperating. I relied on my normal official intelligence and Photoshop skills to present our viewers with this Fat Elvis UFO JFK lab leak thumbnail. But what are we going to talk about tonight?
That's exactly it. I mean, the question here is how frequently does what is at some point considered a conspiracy theory become the mainstream narrative? Like, how often does that happen? And in the thumbnail, you show JFK, and that's certainly, I'd say, the showcase, scenario. And a lot of that is due to Dr. Cyril Wecht, who we've had on the show, thanks to your connections. You were gracious enough to get him as a guest, and he was kind enough to come on the show. And it was Dr. Cyril Wecht who pointed out the evidence that a single bullet couldn't conceivably do all of this damage, and therefore there had to be another shooter from somewhere else or something like that. And so it was Dr. Cyril Wecht that kind of shifted it from, Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman to there were probably multiple shooters, right? And now today, I think most people accept the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill John F. Kennedy from the book, repository window up there. That's not the most likely scenario.
I agree with you.
That has,
I think many people certainly question it, even if they don't know all the details.
Exactly what happened. Right. They may not necessarily know what did happen, but they're not buying the narrative that was served up. And that's probably the showcase scenario. Now, what I have seen, what I've noticed, what I've observed recently is that a number of people who are experts in their field are taking what to me appears to be the conspiracy theorist position, which I find somewhat astounding. And it's kind of a flip the script kind of scenario where the guy who looks like the conspiracy theorist on YouTube in the getup, that's me, presents a whole bunch of official data coming from the WHO and Johns Hopkins and the CDC, and a whole bunch of PhDs and epidemiologists and virologists tell you none of that data is valid. I was like, well, that sounds like the conspiracy theory. So we're going to look at what has become sort of accepted dogma that's actually a conspiracy theory. What are these things? And there's a handful of them that we're experiencing right now as we speak in real time. And so that's what we're going to get into in today's show. And then we have a couple video clips to share with our patrons. So when you and I go where we can speak freely, we'll be sharing some video clips from a year or two ago that gets into to what extent was ostrich bias in effect, where people just simply not looking at the evidence because it challenged everything that they thought or believed. So that's what we're going to get into with our patrons. If you want to explain to people about why we need patrons and how
Oh, yeah.
we're not monetized on the YouTube platform, neither of us, right? So I haven't made $1 from Google.
No. And of course, we've created this direct to viewer sponsorship program because I don't want to make money from Google. The way they want to set up all of these platforms is to use the traditional, corporate sponsor-based sponsor system where whoever is making the show is always going to be beholden to the sponsor, whoever it is, whether it's Ivory Soap, Pfizer, Exxon, or Google. If you put something on there that the sponsor doesn't like, they'll just say, well, we don't want to be associated with that. We're cutting the sponsorship. So what we've done, John, is, and thank you for helping me do this. Thank you to all of the viewers who sponsor the show. People are going to be able to join us on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and Subscribestar and Patreon/crowdsourcethetruth. I want to give people a little bit of background on this as well, because you see, you and I would be long gone by now if it was not for our viewer sponsors, because all the people, whether it's corporations or individuals who own these platforms, seem to be quite fickle. Earlier today, it was announced on the YouTube, whatever webpage they announced this stuff on, that they have reversed their misinformation policy. This author says they're doing it in order to allow election denialism. And I don't want to go too into this right now. We need to understand exactly what's going on with YouTube and while they're doing this. But I don't know, this is kind of like a new word, election denialism. It sounds like restless leg syndrome or one of these maladies that have been invented. I find it remarkably similar. I don't know if you're familiar with this, John, because when you and I first met, you said to me, you latched on to Vegas because you're a marksman, you're a gun enthusiast, you're a Second Amendment supporter, and you've got a lot of experience with long-range shooting and fancy sniper rifles and all the technology involved in that. And something said to you, there's no way this is the true story, and you began investigating, and you've become probably the most prolific Las Vegas shooting investigator, certainly that I'm aware of. But this term, you said to me, I'm not into all this conspiracy theory stuff. We're looking at Vegas. But there's been a red pilling, an eye-opening that I think begins with the realization that you had at Vegas. And it takes a little while, because even when you realize, hey, wait a minute, something's telling me we're being lied to about Vegas, it's another leap to say, well, wait a minute, we were lied to about this, we were lied to about this. So just like they're talking about election denialism, I don't know if you've seen this dispatch here. This is from the chiefs of certain stations and bases. Countering criticism of the Warren Report is the subject. And it says that our concern is from the day of President Kennedy's assassination on, there has been speculation about the responsibility for his murder. Although this was stemmed from a time when the Warren Commission report, which appeared at the end of September 1964, various writers have now had time to scan the Commission's published report and documents for new pretexts for questioning, and there has been a new wave of books and articles criticizing the Commission's findings. In most cases, the critics have speculated as to the existence of some kind of conspiracy, and often they have implied that the Commission itself was involved. Anyway, this thing goes on to coin the phrase conspiracy theory, and I think it was mostly talking about Mark Lane, who was a lawyer who totally disbelieved the Warren Commission and just went around with a 16mm camera interviewing people who the Warren Commission missed, who basically gave him astounding eyewitness testimony that seems to be very true and accurate. So just like we had this conspiracy theory term back in the day, I think the people that want the public to believe that you and I are so-called conspiracy theorists, they're realizing that a lot of people are clued into the fact that any person who presents litany of compelling evidence and is simply dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, might be somebody you should listen to. So they've got these new terms: disinformation, election denialism. What do you think about YouTube overturning this policy, John?
Well, it's refreshing, right? It's a shame for all of the videos that were struck back when
Right.
the old policy, of which I had at least one or two that were struck over that policy. So it's
Wow,
nice to see them.
14,000 Twitter followers, John. Nice going.
Yeah, so it's nice. It's nice to see them change course. So again, right now we're live on YouTube, so I like to be gracious to our hosts. So it's nice to see them change course, and I'm happy to see that along with the new management. Right, so Susan Wojcicki is retired, and now we have a new CEO at YouTube, and we're seeing changes like this. So it's encouraging. Right, we'd like to see more progress in the same direction. So we'll see how that
I
plays
hope
out.
you're right. I don't trust them at all. I think this is some kind of trick where they'll just, come up with some other. I tell you, if they just automatically restored everybody who they kicked off for these fickle policies, maybe that would be okay. But the problem is they didn't even apply the policies in an even-handed way. I mean, you and I have spoken quite a bit about the time that Jason Fike came on the show and was talking to us about some of the details and subtleties that are perhaps not well understood about 47 USC Section 230, the Communications Decency Act that protects these large platforms from lawsuits. It seems like his research indicates that there's a problem with the way that it's written, in as much as it seems to be able to be applied any way at all. It can be applied favorably to the large companies, not applied to small companies like mine, and they can basically do whatever the hell they want with this thing. It's pretty bad.
Well, and again, I think a lot of it has to do with intent, right? And so when you look at folks like us that are doing investigative journalism, you may not agree with our findings, but certainly there's no malicious intent here. I mean, and if you can't figure that out, something's wrong with you. I mean, you need to be able to discern the difference between people who have malicious intent and people who are doing what they're doing, somewhat altruistically. I mean, you and I make a living from it, but we're doing it because we believe this is the right thing to be doing. It's not. Neither of us are getting anywhere near rich. That's just not happening. So
no, going broke, more like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's a little comic relief, John. Look at this. Laura Loomer, I didn't know this. She has a bulldog that's 4 today. That's a very appropriate breed for Laura. She's a bit of a bulldog herself.
Well, look, is it a boy or a girl bulldog?
Today is my bulldog's birthday. She's 4 years old. Her name is Loomer. Loomer the bulldog. I mean, I think obviously that's an appropriate dog.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty cute. Well, we've got a couple slides that we can share with the YouTube audience before we go to our patron-only portion of the show, where we go into some of the videos and stuff. So why don't we share some of this work? As you said, I just hit 14,000 followers, something like that. And if you zoom in, you can show everybody how that's actually the number 3. If you zoom in real close, it's 14,114. And for those of you who know math, that's actually the number 3. So
what?
Because, right? Well, yeah. So 1 from 4 is 3. And then 1 times 1 from 4 is 3. So you get lots of threes.
It's a bit of a stretch, perhaps.
Well, I thought that you'd appreciate that. All right. So we're at 14,000 followers on Twitter. And what's starting to happen on Twitter a little bit is, people are starting to pay attention a little bit more to this global disappearance of influenza. It's the sort of thing, it's like you can't ignore it. It's similar to aspects of the Vegas shooting case. It's like, well, once somebody plants the seed in your head that there's no gunfire coming from the room, and then you look at all the video clips and you're like, yeah, there's no gunfire coming from the room. I mean, there's not. So it's the same sort of thing that's happening here with coronavirus. I wanted to share some, parenting advice, though, before we get started and get into the deep stuff. And this goes back to my first ex-wife. So this is a photograph I took of my first ex-wife and my oldest daughter back in the day.
In 1955? What is this?
Something like that. Yeah, that's when, when she was 4 or 5 years old. And she says, Mommy, I think I might be a boy. And my first ex-wife said, well, you're not. And that was it. And we moved on. And
Did that
that's how we used
happen?
to handle things. Of course. Because of the kids.
Really?
Of course. Daddy, I think I'm Spider-Man. Daddy, I think I'm really Batman. Daddy, are you Batman? Are you really Batman? I think I'm really Batman, Daddy, right?
Right.
Yes, you're really Batman. Your name is Bruce, really. And, we're just calling you this just for the neighbors, okay?
I have a question.
Don't tell me.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So it seems to me that the cure for your kid thinking they're Batman is to let them wear the Batman costume or her Batman costume to the restaurant, Batman costume to school or whatever. And then after something happens, they'd be like, I don't want to be Batman anymore, right?
Well, it all depends, right? So if it's something innocuous like Batman, that's probably okay. If your son says, Daddy, I want to be John Wayne Gacy, can I dress up like a clown? You probably say, no, you can't. And we move on, just like here.
Well, the kid's not going to know John Wayne Gacy, but for a kid to want to dress up as a clown,
I'm using
it's
that as
normal.
a crazy example. My point is there's certain things that you cut off. In other words, you nip it in the bud. That's where we
certain
get
other things that you don't cut off.
Exactly. So you nip some things in the bud, and there's other things that you just keep baking cookies. So that's where we go. All right, so let's go to our next slide. What do we got here? So, yeah, this is kind of the first big conspiracy theory that it seems everybody has adopted. And it kind of blew my mind a little bit because it's like, how am I on the other side of this argument? This is wacko. This is the map of China. And it somehow, the narrative of China is lying was developed very early. As soon as I started posting, there's not 10 people dead in Hong Kong, Shanghai, or Beijing. And there's, less than 5,000 people dead in all of China. And immediately we had the soundbite, China is lying. Couldn't be simpler, rolls off the tongue, easy to remember, and it suits all the xenophobia, right? So anybody who's xenophobic about China, China's lying for sure, right? But this is where the pandemic began, is in China. The whole thing started in China. So if China is lying, well then what did we just watch on television with the pandemic and the seafood market? And why is everybody obsessing about Wuhan and the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
And why all the guards outside that lab? Like, what is going on there?
If China's lying, why did we declare a global pandemic? You can't have it both ways. So we declared a global pandemic based on everything we saw in China. And
Italy.
President Trump said, I spoke to Xi. I spoke to him. He's got this under control. So when everybody starts saying, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about big name epidemiologists, PhDs, virologists, masters in public health, say, well, we don't trust the numbers coming out of China. I said, well, then that makes you the conspiracy theorist because we're looking at Johns Hopkins and the WHO's date. We're looking at the official stuff.
Well, but wait,
if you guys are going to say, well, we don't believe that data. Well, based on what? Do you have evidence?
But also, what does that mean about the CDC and the WHO? Like, in other words, if you know that somebody is a ridiculous liar and a bad source of information, but then suddenly they become the editor of the New York Times, what does that mean? Do you now trust trust that person because they're at the New York Times, or distrust the New York Times because it's run by somebody that you know is lying? It just doesn't make sense what they're saying.
And again, the fact that it's the experts, it's the pundits who are saying, well, we don't trust the data coming out of China. Well, then how the hell did you declare a global pandemic? Why did you put all the airplanes away? Why did you do that? I thought it was based on what the hell was going on in China. No, that's not why we called it the China virus, the Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus, the Wuhan coronavirus, the China virus. Isn't that what we looked at last week with our
But
patrons?
that became
right?
racist after.
It's
Couple
at
weeks.
one point it was racist, and then at the other
Yeah.
point, well, it's a China virus. So depends on the timing. So then similarly, we saw something else happen. That if you want to bop over to Twitter again, go to the first post of mine on Twitter that I have pinned, because this was kind of a watershed moment, and this was the moment, the first post I have pinned on Twitter.
That one?
And it should be the John, keep going. It's the Jon Stewart video right down there. So the reason that this was a watershed moment, you don't have to run the audio. Jon Stewart shows up on Colbert, which he's the producer of. He's the boss. He pays Colbert's salary. And he shows up on the show, and he says, yeah, they resurrected the 1918 Spanish flu. That's one thing.
And you were really the only person talking about it at that time. Before he said that, other than Taubenberg and those guys who were going to TED or wherever they were doing that, I hadn't heard anybody talk about this other than you.
Right. And the fact that he kind of tied it together with what he breaks the ice here and says he thinks it came from the lab in Wuhan. And Colbert is like, what? What do you mean it came from the lab in Wuhan? I thought it came from the wet market and a bat and the bat soup. And Jon Stewart is just like, that is absurd. It's absurd. And the point is, at that time, he was lambasted by his peer group for doing it. They treated him like, oh boy, here he goes. We got another Rusty Rockets here. We got another Russell Brand. We got another, Bill Maher. We got another convert that's switching over from the liberal side that, next thing you know, he's going to be wearing a MAGA hat. And that's how they portray it is, here he goes. And this was a watershed moment, because prior to this, if you suggested that the coronavirus came from the Wuhan lab, like all my videos did, you were, all your videos were suppressed, and that was treated like conspiracy theory stuff. And then
I have one
Stewart
more question.
Introduces it. Yeah.
What is the difference between getting lambasted and lamb basted?
Basted lamb is far tastier.
It looks
than
good.
Getting
lamb that's making me hungry right
Big
now.
fan. Big fan. Yeah, I'm thinking of raising sheep just so I can eat it. So, big fan. But yeah, getting lambasted is
No, I know.
It's
just a cheap joke.
Yeah, just not tasty. One bit.
Now, we got just 2 minutes left, John, before we make the transition over to subscribestar.com and patreon.com/I am John Cullen, and the whole sponsor exclusive segment that people can join us for and sponsor the show on. Take us out with some closing remarks here in the last 2 minutes.
Jump ahead, if you would, to the red slide that says New York City versus, So the net of this is we've got a whole bunch of professional people who kind of bought in to this conspiracy narrative that China's lying.
Holy cow. When was this on Fox?
The day after I spoke to Laura. And then
how have people not looked at this?
Yeah, so I should.
Dude,
so
this is
Laura
another
put this on
data
her
anomaly. This makes zero sense.
This was the conversation I had with Laura Ingraham, and they put this up on the show. We had emails that night, 2 minutes after she closed the show, 11:02 p.m. She's sending me emails, and I congratulated her on this, and I said, "This is Pulitzer Prize winning stuff. You're calling them out. Beijing's got 8 dead, Shanghai's got 7 dead, and New York City's got 8,600 dead."
Why is Trump saying Cuomo did a good job? This is ridiculous.
How did Hannity not pick this up and run with it? How did Tucker Carlson not pick this up and run with it? In other words, this didn't seem relevant to people, that the virus that's coming from China. So this is Fox, based on the relationship I had with Laura. She put this up on the show one night, and that was it.
Wow.
And they must have
somebody told
down.
her, do not
shut
be showing
that down. Yeah,
Right.
shut that down.
All right, so
That's,
John, we're going to continue talking about this in under 5 minutes. People can join us on subscribestar.com/I am John Cullen, patreon.com/I am John Cullen, and any of the sponsorship platforms for Crowdsource the Truth. It's the beginning of the month. It's a great time to join, although that really doesn't matter anymore. I think all of the platforms have adjusted their billing so that you just get billed whenever you join. You know, they start a new month whenever you join. So there's no need to wait until the end of the month or start at the beginning of the month. If you enjoy this reporting, if you want journalists like John and I to continue bringing you this information, it's critically important that people become sponsors. And we are constantly under assault by these putative FBI UCOs, undercover online operators, something we've just found an Office of the Inspector General report about and testimony from an FBI special agent. So that's not a conspiracy theory unless it's the FBI's conspiracy theory. I think we might be onto something. We'll be back